The rain hammered against the windows of the Fort Liberty mess hall as a group of infantry soldiers huddled around their table, complaining about the upcoming change of command. Sergeant Mike Torres took another bite of his burger and shook his head. "I heard the new general is some pencil pusher from the Pentagon. Probably never seen real combat." His buddies nodded in agreement, their voices growing louder with each complaint. They were hard men, battle-tested veterans who'd served in the most dangerous places on Earth, and they had little patience for leaders they deemed soft or inexperienced. They'd earned their cynicism through blood and sacrifice, or so they told themselves. The mess hall door opened, letting in a gust of wind and rain. A young woman entered, maybe late 20s, petite and slender in civilian clothes that were now soaked through. Her hair hung in wet strands around her face, and she carried a small duffel bag that looked too heavy for her frame. She glanced around the crowded hall, clearly looking for somewhere to sit. Torres nudged his friend, Corporal Jackson. "Look at this. Some officer's daughter, probably lost on base." And Jackson laughed. $20 says she asks us for directions to the commissary within 2 minutes. But what none of these battle-hardened soldiers knew was that this drenched, fragile-looking girl was about to change everything they thought they knew about strength and leadership. If you think you can predict what happens next, you're in for the shock of a lifetime. Because this story will flip every assumption on its head. The woman approached their table, her boots squeaking on the linoleum floor. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Torres looked her up and down, barely hiding his amusement. "Sweetheart, this is the infantry section. Civilians usually sit over there." He pointed to the far side of the room. The woman smiled slightly, a gesture that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll just sit here if that's okay. I'm pretty tired." Before Torres could object, she slid into the empty chair, setting her duffel bag on the floor with a thud that suggested it was heavier than it looked. Jackson leaned forward. "You lost, ma'am. Need us to call someone for you? Your dad, maybe?" The other soldier snickered. The woman pulled out a protein bar from her pocket and began eating it slowly, seemingly unbothered by their condescension. "I'm not lost. I'm exactly where I need to be." Torres exchanged glances with his friends. "Look, no offense, but you seem a little out of place here. This is a military dining facility during training hours. It can get pretty rough." Lots of crude language, soldier talk. "Might not be comfortable for someone like you." The woman took another bite of her protein bar, her dark eyes studying each of them with an intensity they mistook for nervousness. "Someone like me," she repeated quietly. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Private Henderson, the youngest and most reckless of the group, couldn't resist. "Well, you're kind of small. Fragile looking. No offense, but you look like a strong wind could knock you over. This place is full of real soldiers, people who've been through hell. It's just different." The woman nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "I see, and you've all been through hell, have you?" Torres felt defensive suddenly. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq. We've earned our place here. We know what real combat looks like, what real sacrifice means. Not trying to be rude, but there's a difference between people like us and people like you." The woman finished her protein bar and carefully folded the wrapper, placing it in her pocket. "Tell me about your deployments," she said, and something in her tone made Torres pause. It wasn't curiosity or admiration. It was something else, something that made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite identify. Jackson jumped in, eager to impress. "Helmand Province, 2012. Some of the heaviest fighting of the war. Lost 3 guys in my unit? You don't forget something like that." The woman's expression softened, genuine empathy crossing her face. "No, you don't. I was in Helmand Province in 2012. Which forward operating base were you stationed at?" The table went quiet. Jackson stuttered, "Fob Dalaram. We were part of the security detail there for 6 months." The woman nodded. "I know Dalaram well. I led the tactical operations that cleared the surrounding villages that year. We lost 18 soldiers during that campaign. 3 of them were under my direct command. Torres felt ice creep down his spine. You led tactical operations? The woman reached into her duffel bag and pulled out a towel, drying her hair with casual efficiency. I did, along with operations in 17 other combat zones over the past 12 years. But I suppose I do look pretty fragile. Henderson's face had gone pale. Who are you? Before the woman could answer, the mess hall door burst open again. This time, a full colonel rushed in, his face flushed with panic. His eyes scanned the room until they locked onto their table. General? I'm so sorry, we didn't know you'd arrived early. Your driver called in sick, and we had no notification that you'd taken a taxi from the airport. We've been searching everywhere for you. The woman, the general, stood up slowly, and suddenly everything about her seemed different. The same small frame now carried an authority that filled the room. The soft voice had an edge of command that made every soldier in the mess hall straighten instinctively. Colonel Patterson, at ease. I told my staff I'd find my own way. I wanted to see the base as it really is, not sanitized for a general's visit. She turned back to Torres and his friends, who were frozen in their seats, their faces various shades of white and red. Gentlemen, allow me to properly introduce myself. I'm Brigadier General Sarah Chun, and as of 0800 tomorrow morning, I'll be your new commanding officer. The silence in the mess hall was absolute. Every soldier within earshot had stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped breathing. Torres tried to find words, any words, but his mouth wouldn't cooperate. General Chun picked up her duffel bag with ease, the weight that had seemed too much for her now looking insignificant. Sergeant Torres, I appreciate your concern about pencil pushers from the Pentagon. I spent 8 years in special operations before my staff positions, so I understand your skepticism about rear echelon leadership. But let me be clear about something. Strength isn't about size or volume or how loudly you can proclaim your experience. It's about resilience, adaptability, and the courage to lead even when people underestimate you. She looked at each of them in turn. I've been underestimated my entire career, called fragile, weak, too small, too young, too female. And every single time I've proven those assumptions wrong, not with words but with actions. Colonel Patterson hovered nervously, but General Chun held up a hand. Corporal Jackson, you asked if I needed to call my dad? My father was a Marine, killed in action in Desert Storm before I was born. I joined the Army to honor his memory, and I've spent every day since trying to live up to the example he set. Private Henderson, you said I look like a strong wind could knock me over. Last year, I completed Ranger School at 41 years old, one of the oldest women to ever earn that tab. The strong winds you're talking about have been blowing against me my whole life. I'm still standing. She paused, letting her words sink in. And Sergeant Torres, you're right that there's a difference between people like you and people like me. The difference is that I've learned not to judge a soldier's worth by their appearance, or make assumptions about their capabilities based on how they look. The general walked toward the exit, then turned back one final time. Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours, full company formation. I expect to see every one of you there, in proper uniform, ready to train. We have a deployment scheduled in 4 months, and I intend to make sure every soldier under my command is prepared, respected, and valued regardless of their gender, size, or background. Because that's what real leadership looks like. That's what real strength looks like. And if anyone has a problem with that, you're welcome to request a transfer. My door is always open. She walked out into the rain. Colonel Patterson scrambling to follow her, leaving behind a mess hall full of soldiers who just learned the hardest lesson of their military careers. Torres sat motionless, staring at the empty doorway. His burger sat cold on his plate, forgotten. Jackson's hands were shaking slightly as he reached for his water. Henderson looked like he might be sick. Around them, other soldiers whispered, word already spreading about what had happened. Torres knew by tomorrow the entire base would know the story of how the infantry guys had mocked the new general to her face. But more than the embarrassment, more than the fear of consequences, Torres felt something else. Shame, deep, burning shame at how quickly he'd dismissed this woman. How easily he'd assumed she was less than him simply because she didn't fit his narrow, definition of what a warrior looked like. That night, Torres couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about General Chun's words, about her father, about Helmand Province, about the Ranger tab she'd earned at 41. He thought about all the times he'd been underestimated early in his career, how much it had hurt, how determined he'd been to prove himself, and he realized he'd become the thing he'd once despised, someone who judged others without knowing their story, without giving them a chance to prove their worth. At 0530 the next morning, Torres was the first soldier in formation.